Welcome to the AirCon Vault, recordings of the live streams from AirWiggle's audio conference. These are made free thanks to our sponsors: A Sound Effect, Game Audio Learning, Kilohertz, Audio Kinetic, Soundcuts, Tsugi, Boom Library, Sound Warriors, and AirWiggles, the online home for audio people.
Hello indeed, and welcome to this presentation on the music of Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora. My name is Lasse, and I work as a music designer here at Massive Entertainment here in Malmö, Sweden. Before we jump into the juicy details about the music, let's just do a quick overview of what the game actually is. So it's a first-person action adventure open world game. You can play it solo or with a friend. It's on the current gen consoles or PC and Amazon Luna. Age rating is 16, and it's developed here at Massive Entertainment, but also with several other Ubisoft studios co-developing. It's developed in our own Snowdrop engine, and it's using Audio Kinetics Wise to implement audio and music alike. It was released last December, so it's still relatively fresh off the bus. So let me present the team a little bit, and by the team I mean the music team. Alex Riviere was the audio director. Simon Landry worked as music supervisor. Patrick Gotches was audio producer. Myself on music design, along with Jacob Buch Johansen, who supported me a lot during the later stages of the development. Also a special thanks to Erik Jacobsen, who worked on the project before me, who also onboarded me to the project and onboarded me to the studio and the role. And before him, Kaiser Larsson, who also worked on the music implementation. We also had a team of composers on the project. Pinar Toprak was the lead composer and worked on the campaign music, the exploration music, and the cinematics. We had Neil Acree, who worked on the open world music as an additional composer. We also had Brian de Olivier, who worked on diegetic music. Also, again, a special thanks to Ola Strand, who worked on the earlier stages of the game, helping to develop audio direction and some of the music features. So, for today's agenda, I'm gonna make a quick run-through of a Music 101 for the game, so just the basics. I'm gonna talk a little bit about linear music in an interactive medium, which is a bit of a theme for this talk. We're gonna take a deep look at a quest called Take Flight from the campaign. And then we're gonna take a look at an open world music feature called Vista music. And then we're gonna do a Q&A at the end. So I'm gonna try to limit this presentation to around 50 minutes and then maybe 10-15 minutes of Q&A after that. I bet I'll run over a little bit. Let's see if we can make it. So, Music 101. Well, the music system is one continuous music event. That means that the music is starting as soon as you boot the game and doesn't stop before you close the game again. This doesn't mean that music is playing non-stop when you play the game. It just means that silence is an active part of the music system. Another way you can think of it is just that music doesn't really stop or start. It just changes state from one music cue to another or from music to silence. It's implemented through a mix of a runtime script, music script, or graph, as we call it in Snowdrop, and also hand-placed, customized logic and scripts for things like the campaign and the cinematics in the game, so special moments. What that means is the music structure is huge, and that means that it's very reliant on hierarchy if you're not that familiar with stuff like music systems. That basically just means that, for example, at the graph here, that if the player is dead, it doesn't matter if they're in stealth or combat. So just a very quick high-level structure view of the music system. Well, it's divided into the in-game, into the menu, and into the cinematics. And then the in-game is branching between the campaign, the custom-tailored campaign, and the systemic open-world music. So just to understand a little bit like why we have done what we have done, I think it's a great idea just to look briefly at the music direction. The music for our game needs to adapt to our story and gameplay needs, being a hybrid between open-world systemic music and very curated linear track for the action-adventure aspect of the game. Our music cues are a mix of linear approach and systemic approach, and that is by Alex Riviere, the audio director. What kind of challenges does that bring for us then? Well, it means that we need to have a hand-tailored campaign embedded in our music system, and it needs to be able to swap between the open world, the systemic music, and the roller coaster experience of the main campaign at any moment. It also means that we need to have a strong systemic core that is able to handle endless exploring of the world. In theory, you could play this game forever, right, and explore and have fun. It also states that we need to at least imitate the experience of a linear music experience, which can be tricky in an interactive medium. On top of that, we have also the co-op aspect, which doesn't make things easier for us. Because in theory, each player could be doing each their own thing at separate parts of the world at the same time. So just to talk a bit about the systemic core, which is the graph or the script we have running in the Snowdrop engine that is feeding the music system information every frame. So it's providing information like, is the player in combat? What time of day is it? Is the player flying? What detection do the enemies have on the player? So on and so on. So here is the little video where you can see in a debug view some of the information that the music graph is calculating as we play. This doesn't mean necessarily that all of these informations are fed directly to the music system all the time. Some of these information that you see on screen, for example, are also just part of bigger chunks of logic as variables. And this is just a handful of the things that we're looking at when running the music system. So I wanted to talk a little about the linear music in an interactive medium, as we kind of stated in the music direction. Well, I kind of wanted to look at, well, it is not a linear medium, so how can we work with the music in a game and make it perceived as linear? So I know there's probably a lot of like good resources out there for what this means, and probably a lot of clever people said a lot of clever things about this. I just tried to make my own very simplified version of this that we can kind of refer to during this presentation. So the first is the moment-to-moment action. So for a game, that would be basically the gameplay. A classic example is the music being tense when you're in a stealth situation, and then changing to action percussion drums when you get spotted, and the enemies will start firing at you. Pretty basic. The next is what I call the audio, visual experience, and aesthetics. So that is more like the mood and how it looks and how it feels. For example, if you were to score a scene, if it was all sunshine, rainbows, you would probably change the music depending on that, rather if it was moody and dark and cloudy. So that kind of thing. Then, of course, we also have the narrative context. So the characters, the story, and the world also has a huge impact on the music. I also want to point out, especially for the last one, that it's not only at the very moment, but also we need to consider what has happened and what will happen. For example, if you were to score a scene, someone sitting in a room, and you would want to maybe consider, well, what happened before this. Maybe an important character died before this. Or maybe someone is about to kick in the door and attack the character sitting in the room. So those things I think music needs to consider as well, especially if it's to be perceived linearly. Then also I have like kind of a fourth pillar, and I feel like the fourth pillar is kind of how the player is receiving all of these things. So the player or the audience in general will have maybe a different view on what is happening than the characters in the game. This means that it's a fun thing to play with sometimes, trying to align what the characters in the game are feeling and what the player might be feeling at the moment. So working with these pillars, well, I think subconsciously when you work with music, whether you're a composer or you a music designer like me or editor, whatever, I think it's hard not to kind of consider these things unless you do it on purpose, maybe as a creative choice. But I think it might be a job to kind of choose what to highlight at one time. So maybe sometimes we want to choose to highlight the gameplay, or sometimes we want to highlight the narrative. Also, I think it's possible to work with multiple of these pillars at the same time. Especially for a game or other longer medias, I think it's important that we don't always use the same pillar, so it's not always music super commenting on the narrative, or it's always very superficial on the gameplay. And as I said before, I think it's really important that we try to consider what has happened and what will happen, and not what is only happening on the screen. So for the game, I wanted to show 2 examples of different approaches to combat scenarios we have in the game. Example A is from a quest called Welcome to the Resistance, and example B is a quest called The Missing Hunter. So example A, Welcome to the Resistance. In this example, the player is voluntarily attacking an enemy base. This means they're attacking on their own terms. You can in theory walk away and come back another time if you don't feel ready. You're the one planning the attack, you're the one in control basically. Also, gameplay-wise, you don't even need to kill any enemy to complete this objective. You just have to destroy the machinery. So you can just choose to not engage. You can also choose to take out the enemies from stealth without ever getting into a real fight. Or you can go in guns blazing and fight everyone if that's what you want. Also, you can just mix these. So there are many approaches to this one. So to complement this, I feel like the music should or can at least complement the gameplay pillar, as I called it a lot. So we want to really emphasize the different options you have. And we do this by evolving the music as you approach the base. The music is reacting to enemy detection, so if they're unaware of you or if they're investigating for you. It's reacting to if they find you and start attacking you. It's reacting to how many enemies are left in the fight, so the combat music will de-escalate a little bit if you start clearing out the base. Also, we have a special system that will change the music depending on if you took down an enemy recently. So that goes deeper into a direction, but we have kind of human-themed music, and humans are the antagonist in this universe, and Navi-themed music, so the protagonists. So for human, it's more brass, it's more orchestral percussion, and for the Navi, it's more flutes and Bulgarian choirs. So the idea is if you take down anyone, you're actively fighting back, and the music will change to a more Navi-themed music. Without further ado, let's see how, or hear how it sounds in the game. Yeah, definitely a bad day at the office for that last RDA soldier. Well, let's look at the other example. So, in this example, you're not the one attacking actively, but you're tracking down your missing friend and their bonded Ikran. You find out that the RDA is having your friend trapped and are trying to hurt their Ikran. So you're rushing to rescue your friend. This means that you're not really fighting on your terms, but you rather have to rush and save your friend. Also, your gameplay options are more limited here, as there is a timer telling you to clear out the enemies before they hurt the Ikran too much. So for this one, we wanted to lean more on the narrative, and we kind of want the player to align with the player character's feeling here, which is urgency and despair, because they want to save their friend. So instead of trying to be cool and calculated, we wanted to rush into the fight and really feel the narrative here. We do that by having a less reactive system overall compared to the other one. So the music is not evolving on the distance to the fight, rather it's just full-on urgent from the beginning as you go there. It's not reacting to the stealth loop, like how much aware the enemies are of you, because we don't want to encourage the stealth really. We want the player to feel that they have to rescue their friend as fast as possible. It does react to the RDA engaging on you, but not as much as it did in the other example. It does also react to how many enemies are left in the fight, but not as much either. And generally, the content is more dramatic here, and it's also using our main RDA theme. So this is how it sounds in the game. So comparing the two examples, so the missing hunter was the second example we just saw here. Well, it's more dramatic and it's less reactive to the player's actions. And that is to kind of enhance the emotional state that the player character is feeling and trying to align the player with that. The music is really trying to push you to go and rescue your friend rather than trying to plan it out and being cool about it. In the first example, the music is more reactive and granular, so that leaves more space to how you want to play it out and how you want to kind of perceive the situation. So let's take a look at some more campaign stuff, and I'm going to show you a quest called Take Flight. And what better way to kick off the quest than by showing you the end of it.
A new bond. It is wondrous to fly on thought alone, to touch the mind of another, your hearts beating as one. You must secure the bond with a final act of trust.
How do I...
Roll for her! Roll for your E-plan! Fly high together and secure the bond!
Yes! We did it, girl! You did it! Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome stuff. Yeah, so this quest is generally a very experiential and narratively driven quest. So it's the quest where the player and the player character gets access and bonds with their personal Ikran. This is not just a huge moment for the player character, as it is a very big moment for any Navi, but it's also a big moment for the player themselves, because they probably been looking forward to getting access to this Ikran and bonding and getting your companion. It's also, the quest itself is very powerful audio-visually, and it's very beautiful with a lot of beautiful vistas and sights and environment as you climb up to get your Ikran. So the experience itself is not that driven on gameplay, but more like on the narrative and on like the experience of getting there rather than gameplay mechanics. So how to implement a quest like that? Well, we wanted to kind of think that it makes sense to use the audio-visual pillar for this one, as well as the narrative context. So we're using the story beats, but also the interesting environment to kind of drive the music as you climb. And the whole experience is more or less just leading up to that climax that you saw in the video just before. So when we talk about the narrative pillar, I think the most important word here is anticipation, definitely. So on a high level, we're really working with that anticipation and excitement for the player to reach their icon finally. And that means that we're partly kind of ignoring the fact that you can fall off and die at any point. The music could be scary and kind of acknowledge this, but we would rather want to push the player and make them feel excited about this, the fact that they're finally getting their Ikran. On a low level, we're also doing a lot of anticipation, and this is something we do throughout the whole game basically, but every time there is a cinematic in the game, we try to set the tone and pre-cue it before that by extracting some of the stems from the cinematic and kind of make them play as you approach the cinematic. This really helps sets the mood for the cinematic, but it also really helps making a nice transition musically into the cinematic. And here are a couple of examples of how we do that in that quest. One click.
Let us not stand around waiting to be caught out.
Through here? Is it safe? Whoa! Easy there. You're okay. Don't worry. It's okay. I won't hurt you.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we also wanted to lean on the audio-visual experience pillar and aesthetics. And by that, I mean that we're kind of using the very beautiful vistas on the way, the environment, like how good it's looking to kind of drive the music along. So it's not only the narrative, because it's nice to kind of get some more drive on the music on the way as well. So without further ado, this is kind of how we do it in the game and how it sounds.
The bond requires trust on both sides. I'm not sure she is ready to trust yet. Remember.
Cool. So to summarize, well, the music content and journey is more defined by the narrative context, and it's meant to highlight the player and the player character's anticipation of getting their icon. We're using the beautiful environment as a secondary driver to kind of evolve the music as you go on your journey. This kind of helps push the player to climb this rookery and make them feel excited rather than afraid of falling off and dying, or maybe discouraging them from sidetracking and finding loot. So on the flip side, let's look a bit on the open world music for Avatar Frontiers of Pandora. So there are 4 main categories of open world music, and they appear in this order of hierarchy. So the first one will take hierarchy over the next one. We have systemic combat, so that is running into RDAs in the open world or running into their landmarks. We have the non-combat landmarks, which is more your typical hub area where you can cook, you can craft, you can hang out and talk with the NPCs. Then we have some side activities like side quests and open world activities is something we have. And then if you're doing none of the above, we consider you to be exploring. And there we have some unique music features, some called Vista, natural locations, and flying. The role of the open world music, well, first of all, it's very important for it to contrast the main campaign, because the main campaign is so intense and highly realized that it's good to kind of have a breather in intensity in the music to create that dynamic width of music experience. It's also really helpful to help establishing identity, because we have 3 main regions in the game that are vastly different in expression and mood. So we have the Kinglaw Forest, which is like a rainforest thing, very lush. We have the Upper Plains, which is way more open and a windy area. And then finally we have the Clouded Forest, which is more temperate, northern forest, a bit more gloomy. And the music will drastically change depending on which of these regions you're in. So we have different instrumentation and different themes depending on these regions, also to kind of establish not only the region but also the clans living there. And finally, we also have a unique identity for the RDA, the bad folks in this story. Also, open world music will help you establish some familiarity, and that's just helping the player to understand that now you're nearing maybe some RDA, some danger, some dangerous landmark, or now you're closer to a safe area. So it kind of helps support the gameplay as well. So if anyone has played the game and spent some time exploring, maybe they would be wondering why there is not that much exploration music going on generally. Well, again, it is to help contrast the campaign and make a nice breather for the player if they're out exploring. It also helps exploration music kind of highlight itself when it actually plays, which helps make it more meaningful. Also because it's the music features in the exploration are standalone music features and not really tied to any gameplay. And I promised to my lead to be humble about this, but the ambience and the player foley, the propagation, the mixing, the vegetation in this game just sounds so good. Kudos to the audio team, not to me, the rest of the audio team. And it would be a real shame to have music going all the time and masking this. So also that. So I want to look back a little bit to the linear music, because I also think we apply that in the open world, the systemic music, as well as in the campaign. So we're still looking at the moment-to-moment gameplay. We're looking at the audio-visual perception for some of the features. We're still trying to consider the past and the future as well as the present, of course. And we're trying to read the player's expected emotional state for some of these features. And I think the best feature to show this, how we kind of work with this, is the exploration music feature, Vista Music. So what is a Vista music feature? Well, it's a system that detects when the player is observing a Vista in the world and then complements that with a beautiful one-shot music cue. It's again, it's a standalone music feature, so it's not tied to any gameplay, it's just music. And it's using that runtime logic that I kind of showed you earlier to determine when the player is observing a Vista. And it's meant to really highlight like how beautiful the world is, and also again help showing what region and establishing that thematic of the area you're in. And as I just said, yeah, it's tied to the region with instrumentation, mood, and themes, but also to further enhance the player's mood here, we're reading what weather it is and what time of day it is, so we have different variations playing depending on if it's raining or if it's day or if it's night. And this is how it sounds in the game. Beautiful score by Pinar Toprak. Well, so how do we determine that the player is looking at a Vista? It's kind of tricky, and doing that by just logic running at runtime. Well, the way it's run through 4 groups of logic that I call it. So on the top we have what I call hard conditions, which is basically defining what a Vista is not. Then we have the soft conditions, which are more looking at if the player is observing a Vista. Then we have the triggering, some extra conditions to actually start the music. And then we have some softer conditions, I call it a bit cheeky, but that is just to make sure that the player is still committed to listening to the Vista and they're not leaving again, so we can stop the music if that is the case. So the flow kind of looks like this. So the hard conditions have to be true, for the soft conditions to be considered, for the triggering to happen, and for the music to start. And then we look at the softer conditions when the music has started. And if the softer conditions or the hard conditions go false when the music has played, well, then it stops again. So hard conditions, again, that is defining what the Vista is not. And it's more things than you see on the screen, but it's things like the player should not be in combat, or they should not be in a polluted area. They should not be taking part of any narrative right now, like in the quests, or being within 120 meters of enemy troops. And this must not have happened the last 30 seconds of gameplay. If that is the case, that none of this is happening within the last 30 seconds, then we can kind of look at, well, is the player then potentially observing a Vista? So first of all, the player must not be running. And then they must either stand in front of a water, or they must stand on some sort of elevated position, like a rock or something, to observe. Then depending on if they're looking at water or not, they have to meet a specific requirement of visibility. Also, if you look up in the air, the visibility requirements will be higher. And that's just because we don't want the Vista to trigger if the player looks like up in the sky, but we actually want them to be observing the beautiful world, because it's a complement to the world. Now, you might ask, what does visibility even mean? So let me just quickly explain that in this context. It just means it's how many unblocked pixels you have in your first-person camera frame within a predefined depth. So if you have 1, you have nothing blocked, like full visibility. And if you have 0, then you're basically like staring into a wall within that depth. To explain it, you can see like on this picture, the visibility is 0.6. So approximately below that line, that is within your defined depth and then blocking your picture. And if I move closer to the tree, that is also within that depth and blocking more of the picture, making the visibility 0.4 instead. So back to the logic. if your soft conditions, then the ones we had before, are true for X amount of time, then the player has to be basically standing still at this point. Then we cast a ray to check if the player is actually looking at pollution or RDA landmarks or RDA units, because we don't want the music here to play if you're looking at bad stuff, so to say. And then finally we're looking, okay, are there any enemies within a full kilometer of the player? And I'm gonna return to why this radius is so big. But if that is the case, well, we play the Vista music. Then we move on to the softer conditions, because we want to make sure that the player is still observing a Vista and the music is relevant. So we have a softer modified version of the soft conditions basically here just to make sure. So here now the visibility only has to be 0.4, which is relatively low, but you cannot be looking completely at nothing. The player must not be walking, or we can still not be looking at bad things, so to say. If that is the case, the music will decrease in volume for the next 10 seconds. And if you reach those 10 seconds, it will fully stop. But if you have managed to turn down the music for maybe 7 seconds and you fulfill the conditions again, the music will turn back up again if you're kind of recommitting to the Vista during this time. Also, if you go into fully running, the music will end already after 2 seconds if you're fully sprinting off the Vista, because 10 seconds is a long time to kind of linger on the music. Okay, I hope you're still with me, because I know this might be a bit hairy. I'm feeling like this person right now, but let's just sum up how it looks. So, hard conditions is what the Vista is not. If this is fulfilled, we can look at if the player is observing a Vista through the soft conditions, then some additional conditions for the triggering, and then we have the softer conditions just to make sure that you're still committed. And then hard conditions or softer conditions can stop the music if not fulfilled. Luckily, I have a video kind of explaining how this looks in the game. Unfortunately for you, I'm not a graphic designer, so I hope it's understandable still. Let's see. So what do I mean by that we're looking at the linearity pillars for this feature in the past, present, and future? Well, in the past, we have the cooldown on the hard conditions, so we're ensuring that the player has not engaged in any bad activity or any like heavy narrative activity for the last 30 seconds. Although that it's not a long time, it's still something to make sure it's not triggering too quickly after something like that. For the present, we're still looking at the same things, but we're also trying to read the player's expected emotional state. So do they have a good view, and are they actually standing still to enjoy it and being there? For the future, yeah, this was the one I wanted to get back to a little bit, but because the triggering of the music, you have to be 1 kilometer away from any RDA units, but for interrupting it in the hard conditions, it's only 120 meters. This means that if you actually manage to trigger the music, that means you're a long way from any RDA units, more than 1 kilometer. And that means that it's very, very unlikely that any unit will actually get into the radius of 120 meters and interrupt your Vista, or like just start firing at you or something like that. So we're trying to prevent that the Vista is interrupted unnecessarily. So it's only on your own terms that it will be interrupted. So we're nearing our end, and I just want to sum up the entire talk. So the music system is just one continuous event, and it's able to branch between systemic open world and hand-placed campaign. To implement that, we're using the systemic core I talked about, so the graph that is running all that logic all the time, but it's also using hand-placed scripting for events like in the campaign and for the cinematics. And we're trying to apply these linear pillars or principle in the campaign, but we're also considering them in the open world. And with that, I'm just gonna say thank you for anyone who came in and watched this talk. Thank you for the content team for filming me here and the audio team. It's been a pleasure working with you all. And most importantly, thank you to AirWiggles for hosting me and in generally just hosting this entire conference. I think that is awesome. And with that, I think we can move on to a Q&A for 10, 15 minutes or something like that, if there are any questions. And thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for this awesome talk, Lasse. That was incredible. Super fascinating to hear about the systems and everything. I love the Vista system. No idea that existed or was a thing. So very, very cool. We've got some questions from the chat to answer, and also now is the time to put your questions in the chat for Lasse to answer. So starting with Siobhan, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. What did you use to create the bass pulse? I believe that was in the very, very first thing, and I guess that is to the composer. So
yeah, indeed. So I wish I could answer that, but yeah, as a music designer, I'm not composing any music, but rather it's the composers that you saw in one of the first slides. So I don't know, to be honest, but I think it sounds cool too.
Yeah, and actually on that, I just wanted to quickly say as well, so for people who don't know, when you're working on very, very big games like Avatar, you actually have the composer side, and then they create the music, and then you've got music implementers, or music designers rather, who then, you know what, Lasse, I'll let you take it over. How would you describe a music designer, or what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a question that I'm facing often, and I'm still not good at answering it, honestly. But it's because I feel like it's a very specialist role, but it's also very versatile at the same time. Because yeah, well, mainly I'm implementing the music, right, and I'm editing the music. I'm creating these systems that you see, but I'm also, to some extent, I'm involved in in asking the composers for different cues. So I'm also a bit involved in the direction like that, but of course that goes to our audio director mainly. But it's a very iterative process, and it's very different from time to time. But it is basically, getting the content from a composer and then making sure it plays in the game, and also, of course, the content that is created from the composer is created to suit the systems that I made.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I assume you also collaborate then both with the composer, the leads and directors, as well as programmers as well for certain systems, I guess, especially when it comes to the Vistas, or do you do that stuff yourself?
Yeah, I mean, to answer the first thing, yeah, I'm embedded in the audio team basically. I think had it been a smaller project, I would just have been like a sound designer, and this would have been part of my job. Yeah, for sure, we use audio programmers. They're amazing. The way that a system like the Vista is done is that we have it's visual programming. So we have these nodes providing information that I'm stealing. So the programmers are responsible for the nodes, and then I kind of put them together to create this kind of logic. So yeah, you could say
Nice.
yeah.
That's similar to Unreal, which of course is available to the public.
Yeah.
So yeah, cool. Then going back into questions from the chat. Hey Lasse, Aditya asked, thanks for this great talk. I was curious, how do you as music designer usually work with the composer to make sure all the music serves the gameplay? Do you create the system first with placeholder music, then the composer starts working on the music based on those systems you designed, or vice versa?
Yeah, I think it's partly both. Definitely for the earlier stages of the development, it's more the systems coming first. So, I mean, we're developing a game, we're trying to make some features, we put in some placeholder to see if it works, and then we request it from the composer. So in our case, I use our music supervisor a lot. We had Simon Landry, so I kind of reach out to him, and we try to figure out a plan, like how many minutes of music and what would it need to have to fulfill the system. But I also feel like as we got further into the game, especially for like big narrative things, it's great to let the composer breathe, and it's easier to maybe just say, we have this situation, we want to feel like this, give us a nice cue, and make sure we have plenty of stems and stuff to play around with. And then we get it in, and then we can get inspired to kind of like how is it playing in that moment. So there's definitely both ways. Yeah, I think.
That's awesome. And yeah, highly collaborative, especially, and great that you have, of course, in a big team like that, music supervisor and everything, all of these fantastic roles. Billy Palmer asks, my question, to what extent has this awesome music system been inspired by your previous game dev experience / systems the studio has created for other titles? Have any ideas been carried over?
So this is my first real project, so to say. So I've been doing some lesser student stuff before this, but no, I have not like had a previous game that I've carried over for. And if I'm honest, I think I don't have any specific title or anything that I'm inspired by. I mean, I think linear games are always amazing, especially for music. But yeah, maybe a bit cheeky, but I'm very inspired by my team, especially my audio director. Right, they've really been trying to establish a great direction and how we want to kind of make the music play out. So I think it's more inspired by that, and then of course my audio director is inspired by the movie and other games like that, for example.
Yeah, I mean, you've got such a stacked audio team. It's incredible. It's really, really cool.
It's a great team, yeah.
Spinosound asks, did you use a more cued and loop-based horizontal arrangement in the system, or was it a more vertical approach, mixing the tracks / stems in blend containers via RTBCs? Thank
you. Well, I think we use, we use both. For example, if I just refer to the Vista right now, I think systemic music would often have a very vertical approach. But what I feel like we've been trying to do is put all the pressure on the system instead. So you saw there were so many variables, so many conditions. We're really trying to find out if it's the right moment. And I feel like if you do so many conditions, then it's great to just, as I said, have a one-shot cue. And so there was no vertical mixing happening on that one, because we've really been trying to find exactly the right time and the right place, and we're looking at the weather and the time of day and the region. So if you actually make it to the triggering, we would just play so to say, a free cue, right? It doesn't have to be able to switch. And I think that makes for the most beautiful cues if you can do that. But for other scenarios, especially like combat, we also do like the vertical approach.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I guess in terms of the cues, so if you were to let it play out, it would just play out, and then that's it.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, that's what I mean by a one shot,
Yeah.
right? You get it from, and that really means that the queue has the privilege, so to say, to develop, right? And if you do a more vertical approach, your music typically have to be a bit more static, because if it develops too much, that will be kind of be perceived as a modifier by itself, I think.
Yeah, for sure. That makes sense. Cool. Adrian asks, for the pre-queued cinematic music, how do you trigger them? Trigger zone/quest manager, and what happens if the player just goes back and gets far from the place that triggered the video cinematic?
Yeah, it's a box. No, I mean, I didn't get too far into how the quests are implemented, but they will be divided into beats, so to say. So it will be a beat to go to the cinematic, and for that particular beat, there will be some sort of volume around that cinematic, just fading in and out the music. If you leave that box again, and when you trigger the cinematic, then you'll make it to the next beat, and then that volume will not longer be relevant. So it's very simple like that.
That makes sense. Simple and easy.
Yeah.
Chirag asks, since the game is open world, how did you manage the music if the player decided to do something else other than the current objective? What kind of checks did you perform to ensure the music flow?
Yeah, I'm happy that you asked. It was part of my presentation, but I didn't have time to go through it really. We have 3 conditions basically to determine whether to play quest music. And it's basically, the first one is run in the script, so that's running by itself all the time. And it's just taking the distance to the current quest objective. So if you're 200 meters from the quest objective, then music is relevant. Then we have the second one, which is the same condition, but it's, instead of being systemically set, it's hand placed. So that is like, for example, when I showed you some of the first examples, you go from A to B, and the distance between us is not really linked to the quest technically, right? So we can just hand place a volume or something like that to define that, okay, this is actually still part of the quest, even though it isn't. And then there's the third condition where we can kind of determine if we want to do it or not. So there are some cases where where we wouldn't want quest music, even though you are in the quest area. That could be in a hub area where you have to talk to an NPC, for example. Then maybe just let the systemic music run here instead of the scripted music. So yeah, it's basically that. Yeah, checking if you're there and checking if we want to do it. And then, as I said, it's further divided into these chapters, and the chapters can use logic. It can use, are you in combat or in your stealth, or are you in this area and this area? So you can expand upon it as much as you want to.
I love games. So cool. So much nerdy stuff. Fantastic. Oren Keep asks, how early into production do these kind of systems get made? Does it start after the score is completely finished, or is it workshopped through the production? Is it considered in pre-production?
Yeah, good question. I mean, both. I think I kind of touched upon it earlier, but it's especially for open world stuff, I feel like as soon as possible, get some systems in and do that with placeholder, get it sturdy, and then you ask for music. But of course, it's game development, and you don't always have that time, right? So sometimes you just have to take a leap of faith and get some content and try to make a system for it. Well, not a system. This would more be the linear things, I think. Yeah, I hope that makes sense.
Definitely. Sarush asks, Nomax asks, how did you test transitions in Wise?
Oh yeah, specific question. I like it. It's I feel like it's someone feeling my pain on the other end. Yeah, I mean, uh, basically you can take all the states you have right running the music system, and you can do that in Wise. But it can be super painful in a very big system like this, where there are so many states, and you can be jumping from like from one child over here to like all the way over to something else, and that requires a lot of state changes. But it's possible, and it can be tricky to do. But I also think it's a good principle just to test the game as much as possible, because you're gonna fall into other things. But yeah, definitely. I mean, transitions are such a big part of this job, and making sure they work, and it's super tricky. So I understand the hassle here.
It's always good as well when your studio has like excellent testing tools and stuff like that. It can be very, very tricky if that's not in place. And when it is in place, it's like, thank you. Life is so much easier.
Yeah, I hear you.
Saruj asks, did the composer need to do anything on the implementation side? I know in the indie world it's common, but I'm curious about AAA games.
Yeah, I definitely think it's really cool in the indie world when they get to do that, but in this case, not at all. They're kind of on the other side, and we have, as I said, the music supervisor in between. Simon in this case could help with that kind of stuff, not implementing, but maybe editing and stuff. But no, they're just doing content, and we'll of course try to explain to them like. It would be nice if we could have a transition for this, or if we can have these layers, but no, they're not involved. And I think it can be cool to kind of shield them from it too. So if you tell them too much about the system, maybe they get too limited. So it can be cool just letting them like be blind and do a nice cue, and then you try to make it fit. But that can also be more work for sure.
Yeah, I definitely think it's interesting as well in terms of the creative aspect, because like you say, that may influence the composer in a certain way that is not desired, and you just want them to focus on just make the music and make it to the audio direction, not to like the system implementation stuff. But it's interesting.
It really depends on the thing, right? Sometimes you'll have to be more transparent on the system. You have very specific needs, but not always, at least.
I also wanted to say one thing that I noticed is that the music blends so well with the environment in a fantastic way. Like it comes in so smooth, and then it just sits there and supports everything. And I mean, how much of that was already there on an early stage, and how much of that then evolved as the mix went?
Oh yeah. I mean, so I'm not really mixing. That was our audio director, Alex. But we did a lot of tricks for mixing and stuff. I mean, I think for the Vista one, we also did like an RTPC where it kind of as it runs, it will slowly fade out the ambience a little bit, and we do like these kind of tricks all over the place. But also especially for the campaign, we have states implemented all over the place, so the mix is also dynamically changing depending on the narrative.
Nice. Yeah, awesome. Any more questions, chat? If not, then we will wrap it up here. Man, what an amazing talk. That was so fun and
awesome. It was awesome to be here.
And the game just It's definitely one of the best sounding games that I've heard in a long time. Like it's incredible, and
Yeah, the audio team did amazing.
yeah, the whole audio team. I mean, I think what's always tricky, especially with huge teams like that, is to have cohesiveness in the entire soundscape, and that's why I also mentioned how well the music like comes in and then goes back out, and then sometimes it takes the center point, and other times it's just there in the background to support. And absolutely masterfully crafted. So yeah, a huge,
Thank you.
huge thank you for you uncovering all of this, and also shout out to the whole team. And also Alex Riviere, who did a AMA. You can still ask questions. He might respond. So definitely check that out in the conference space as well. Now, we will wrap up with that, and you can all join as well the hangout. I'm not sure if you have much time to hang around, Lasse, but maybe throughout the day you can check it. So if there's any further questions, go in here, tag Lasse, and ask away as well. And yeah,
Sure, yeah.
Thank you so much for your time and insight. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
I hope everyone enjoyed. Thank you so much.
Yep. Have a nice one.